speakers today for participating in our symposium on John Lockwood Kipling. We hope to explore the international legacy of hereditary arts and crafts in India and Pakistan, and the lasting influence of arts education in 19th century British India on cultural values and style in Britain, India, and Pakistan. As you can see from our printed schedule, I will open today's session with my co-curator and co-editor, Julius Bryant, keeper of Word and Image at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. We thought we would give you a sense of the research behind the show and accompanying catalog before hearing from our speakers about the importance of John Lockwood Kipling's legacy. The day will end with a panel discussion and questions from the audience. And can I please ask everyone to check their cell phones and turn them off, because they're always ringing around here. Now, this project began some 20 years ago when Julius Bryant, then chief curator at English Heritage, reinstalled Queen Victoria's Durbar Room at Osborne. Okay, there we go. Julius was then chief curator at English Heritage, and I don't know if many of you have visited, but Osborne House is on the Isle of Wight. This room was conceived by Kipling and his notable student, Ram Singh, his student, I should add, at the Mayo School. They created this plasterwork Indian-style room for the display of the Queen's innumerable gifts from all over India, sent to mark her Jubilee of 1887. Julius studied the works of Kipling, as it was then known, and toured India with filmmaker Bryant Bathan to document craftspeople at work in traditional arts and crafts. And I think for Julius, as he's told me, this was the beginning about thinking about Kipling's legacy. The film is still on view today at Osborne some 20 years later and has been reproduced for viewing in our gallery as well here at the BGC, and I hope that those of you who haven't visited the show will take the time after the symposium today and go and spend some time in front of this film and viewing our show today. Now, when Julius was appointed keeper of Word and Image at the Victoria and Albert Museum, he brought with him the idea of a Kipling show, but first he partnered with me on two remarkable exhibitions highlighting key protagonists of British design and architecture, James Athenian Stewart in 2006 and William Kent in 2014. As you can see, I like working on polymaths. When we had finished working on these two exhibitions, Julius then introduced me to John Lockwood Kipling. And we thought it would make a great addition to our series of collaborative research and exhibition projects between the BGC and the V&A. So with the blessing of director Mark Jones and then director Martin Roth, we began to hunt for signs of JLK, as we began to call him, at the V&A. The treasure hunt took us to every storage facility of the V&A, many departments, from the Asian department to the Princeton Drawings Department and the National Art Library, and to institutions and collections throughout the world. Our adventure began in the V&A's Archive in Art and Design and the early building history of the museum. Here we found evidence of Kipling's involvement in the terracotta decoration of the early building. The Prints and Drawings Department had a Godfrey Sykes design for the original facade of the South Kensington Museum with portrait of JLK, which matched the actual mosaic procession in which Kipling's portrait follows that of the museum director, Henry Cole, its architect, and the designer, Sykes himself. And can you see he's Kipling with his sort of bald Socratic head and beard, marching in the procession. Now, the Asian Department's historic collections had artworks done by Kipling, his students, and works brought from the international exhibitions that he worked on, particularly displays of work of the Punjab. His 46 lifelike sketches of craftspeople at work in Shimla, Bombay, Delhi, Agra, Lucknow, and Amritsar were acquired by the Indian Museum in London and then transferred to the South Kensington Museum in 1880, where they are still in the collection of the museum. His student Mohammed Din's fresco of painted ornament from Wazir Khan's mosque, recording the original details and architecture of the mosque, one of the landmark buildings of Lahore, as you know, and these were bought from the Calcutta exhibition, and this was one of many beautiful drawings in the collection at the V&A, and some are already on view in the Nehru Gallery. Now, other Kipling-related items were on view in the Nehru Galleries, and the octagonal table and the metal casket were exhibits chosen by Kipling for the international exhibitions that he curated, and from which the South Kensington Museum made purchases for their growing Indian collections. Now, the stores at Blythe House and the very, very deep storage, I should say, at Deep Dean, a former military store for missiles underneath Salisbury Plain, were great sources for us to find Kipling material, and some of this material had not been seen or studied for more than 60 years. The V&A had used the Colonial and Indian exhibition in South Kensington to boost their Indian collections. And we found a door with hammered copper panels produced by the craftsmen of the Golden Temple at Amritsar, and this was one of the larger purchases of the V&A. We found wooden panels inlaid with brass from the Punjab. These were also added to the collection, and similar brass inlaid panels were bought for the industrial arts collections at the Kellengrove Mansion in Glasgow. At Blythe House, we also found Kipling-curated objects from the earlier Punjab exhibition of art and manufactures that Kipling undertook in 1881 to 1882. Copies of the catalog, the reports, and the photographs were sent to the South Kensington Museum and spread among departments of the museum. At Dean's store, we found a cast of a Buddha head sent to the South Kensington Museum by Kipling in 1883, taken from the Buddhist sculptures in the Lahore Central Museum. We also uncovered, and here you see it after it was conserved at the V&A. We also found a bay window from a Lahore merchant's house that Kipling secured for Caspar Purdon Clark, a special officer from the South Kensington Museum, on his visit to India in 1880 to 81 in making acquisitions for the museum's collections. The National Art Library of the V&A supplied copies of the Journal of Indian Art for the study and encouragement of Indian arts and manufacture, established by Kipling with Government of India officials, and then edited by Kipling for many years. And we also found many of the books illustrated by Kipling, such as Edward Emerson's Oliver's Across the Border, and this was Kipling's first mainstream British book illustration project. Now, the University of Sussex, the Beinecke Library at Yale, and Princeton's rare book collection had masses of illustrations and photographs. I show you two of the many Kipling illustrations we found at the University of Sussex. Rudy's idea of heaven, in which, and the rain, it raineth every day. In 1868, when the infant Rudy fell sick with a fever, his father subsequently sketched a drawing of his convalescence, with his son eating a mixture of honey and jam, and being fed by an angel. And a self-portrait of the rotund Kipling from the back under a large umbrella that you see on your right shows the excessively rainy weather that the family had to endure during the monsoon period in India. At the Beinecke at Yale, we located JLK's design for a menu for Rudyard's birthday. And I love this image because it really shows the affection of the father for his son. And this was made for Rudyard's 25th birthday. And of course, the elephant plaque JLK made. He made this medallion relief of an elephant's head in profile with a swastika for use on his son's book covers. And of course, Rudyard had the swastika removed from the emblem in 1933 in silent protest. Princeton had a great collection of Kipling illustrations and photographs in their rare book collection, including Going to Shimla, that you see on your left, which is a drawing of the route the Kiplings took to get to the summer capital of the British government in India, in the Punjab region. And Alice, we know, went there for the first time in 1881. And I think if you look carefully, you can see Alice traveling up the hills to get there in a sedan chair. Now, on the right are some of the blue and white ink drawings that we discovered for this series of plates that I'm going to tell you about in a little while. Now, other photography, particularly of the exhibitions displays, were found in Melbourne, the Melbourne Museum in Australia, the Centre for Architecture in Montreal, the University of Glasgow, and the Asian departments of the V&A. The Indian sections of the Melbourne International Exhibition set up to establish closer relations between India and Australia was well photographed. The students in the Mayo School made a carved show cabinet, which was designed by Ram Singh under Kipling's direction. And if you look carefully, you can see it sort of inching out in the back. And Kipling was responsible in this show for the selection of, we know, laces, net, trimmings, and embroidery, as well as a general collection of art from the Punjab. And this is a view of the Indian court from the University of Glasgow that you see on the left. And on the right is a photograph from an album that was sent to the South Kensington Museum, which shows a carved cabinet from the Calcutta International Exhibition of 1883 to 84. And this was the first international show where Kipling was in charge of the Punjab court. Now, the National Trust Batemans, the former home of Rudyard Kipling, had JLK ephemera, such as this low relief self-portrait in terracotta, in which is it's got Fumus Gloria Mundi written into the terracotta, which, as you know, means smoking the glory of the world, because Kipling was a nicotine addict and loved to smoke. And we see him here with his prominent Socratic head and his full beard, which is relieved with a pipe and volume in his left hand. And then on the right, we discovered his jug that he made as a gift to his future brother-in-law. And we see the pairing here of complimentary texts about praising ale and images of Bacchus and other imbibers. Now, the British Library had a wealth of reports from the British government in India that documented Kipling's work in India and some of his drawings of members of the villages that were part of cotton production in Western India, you can see the barber massaging the head of a customer to the village messenger down below. These were commissioned for the London International Exhibition of 1872, which had an entire display of the production of cotton. Now, the most surprising discovery was the series of 13 plates at Wimpole Hall, the former home of Kipling's granddaughter, Elsie Bambridge, another National Trust property. Created by Kipling himself, these white earthenware plates with cobalt blue drawings were aimed squarely at the British Indian audience. I was able to identify them as part of the exhibition display for the Punjab exhibition of arts and manufactures of 1881 to 1882, and I was amazed to see them described under the title, Nos Enemies Intimes. Kipling was definitely a man of his times. Now, the Kipling Society in London, who was very generous and useful with their time and knowledge, led us to an unpublished Kipling notebook with drawings of people, animals, botanicals, and architecture, and I show you the only color sketch within, which was of a flower, and private collectors and grandchildren of the Raj who had inherited art and keepsakes from family members who had served in India provided surprising items for us, such as these ornamental carvings of human and elephant heads for Churchgate Station, Bombay, which we found scattered among 5 family members, in fact. Now, private letters were hard to come by, since his son Rudyard had burned most of his father's private papers immediately after his death. But glimpses of his character and personal life were found in the few surviving personal correspondences and memoirs of the period that we uncovered. Letters from the Wimpole archive transferred to the University of Sussex, including those to close friend Margaret Burne-Jones and correspondence to Baden Henry Powell and Sophie Halsey, preserved in the Bodleian Library, gave us some insight into his character. Moreover, these letters revealed a design for the Punjab screens for the colonial exhibition that you see on your right. This was in a letter to Margaret Burne-Jones, and we found even designs for dresses for Sophie Halsey, mother of Sybil Colfax, in a letter in the Colfax archive in the Bodleian Library that you see on your left. My favorite memoir that we found describes the actions of the young Kipling at the pottery of Pinder, Bourne, and Hope. John Bourne Pinder, son of one of the owners, recalled, quote, "In the pottery was a young man named John Kipling, a designer of decorations. He was a very clever young man, though somewhat eccentric. He used, I remember, as a boy, to carry pet mice attached to him by fine chains. He was a very vigorous man, full of amusing stories, and could do innumerable clever tricks. When I was a boy, he made casts of my face." We also, I must add, learned a great deal about Kipling through his journalism for the Indian press, his articles for the Civil Gazette and the Pioneer, and these were preserved in volumes of scrapbooks at the University of Sussex. Although he often wrote anonymously under the names Special Correspondent or Nick O'Teen, and my favorite is Nicotine Nick, among others, these scrapbooks are annotated by Kipling himself and helped us locate other writings in the press and journals throughout the world. Nicotine Nick was an in-joke with the paper's readership. As I explained to you, Kipling was a great smoker. Later additions to our research came from a great-great-grandson of JLK who finally answered our letters after 3 years of chasing him and directed us to the only known JLK designs for vases and ewers at the Brampton Museum and Art Gallery in Newcastle under Lyme. And another late discovery was the drawing for a Kipling-designed medal at the National Army Museum in London, showing a Sikh, a Persian, and a Gurkha soldier, which does not appear to have been struck. A visit to Nebworth, seat of the Lytton family since 1490 in Hertfordshire, and British home of the Viceroy of India presented all we needed for the imperial assemblage of 1877 and that chapter of our research. In January 1, 1877, the Viceroy hosted a great gathering of the Prince and peoples of India to celebrate the official proclamation of Queen Victoria as Empress of India. It was the most spectacular display of British imperial pageantry of the 19th century. Kipling's representations ranged from major works, such as the design of the amphitheater in which the proclamation was read, to minor details, such as the lighting in the tent, in which Lytton formally greeted individual princes. Kipling and the students of the Mayo School of Industrial Art were also asked to prepare a series of banners emblazoned with heraldic devices to be given as gifts by Queen Victoria to the princes and chiefs of India during the ceremonies preceding the proclamation. The Lettons had returned to England with photographs of the event, the banner made for the Viceroy, including its standards, which was so heavy that each banner required two brawny Highlanders to carry it, and when borne in procession, the banner had to be carried on an elephant. The ceremonial robes, an oil painting of the event, and a ceremonial book were also located at Nebworth. Now, Julius and I, after scouring institutions and collections in the US and Great Britain, then made a trip to India because we wanted to walk in the footsteps of JLK. We were not sure what our reception would be like to this figure branded by some as an agent of imperialism, nor did we want to get swept up in what Julius called romantic Rajism. We were relieved to find much interest in our work and were able to find some of the bricks and mortar related to his career in their original setting. We visited the JJ School of Art in Bombay, which is still very much in existence, and ironically, when we were there, they were working on one of the Ajanta cave paintings in the conservation studio. What we didn't find, however, was much of the paper archaeology that we hoped would survive in India at the Sir J.J. School and other Mumbai institutions. I show you, yes, these contemporary illustrations, and then some of the other commissions that we were able to locate that show, this one shows Kipling's most famous commission in sculpture for the arched openings at Crawford Market. And other images document the elaborate sculptural work carried out in plaster, stone, and marble by Kipling and his students that adorn the Gothic Revival buildings in Bombay. When we began, Kipling was still a somewhat shadowy figure who was still not included in the Dictionary of National Biography, although his more famous son Rudyard had a long account and his wife Alice MacDonald Kipling had a short listing. This is no longer the case, for Julius was invited to write a suitable entry for the DNB in 2015. We were able to build on the earlier work of a host of scholars, including Partimitter, with his much maligned Monsters, a history of European reactions to Indian art, and art and nationalism in colonial India, Maruk Tirapur's dissertation and article on John Lockwood Kipling and British art education in India, and a slim biography that had been done in 1988 about the Pater by Arthur Ankers. And I would also, at this point, like to think about Peter Hoffenberg, who wrote this magnificent book called An Empire on Display about the art exhibitions in which Indian works were shown both in India, Great Britain, and other places in the world. And I'd also like to take a minute just to thank Peter Hoffenberg, because when we began this project, he sent me 8 boxes of research on Kipling. It was all his Kipling dissertation research and the research for this book, and he had hoped to write a biography of Kipling, but gave that up. And we were the proud recipients of all of this amazing research, which saved us years of work. This same year, Tim Berenger became very interested in Kipling, and he explored the context of his work in the world of the British Empire in his notable publications, including the South Kensington Museum and the Colonial Project, and the object, Empire, Material Culture, and the Museum. Kipling then played a significant role in Men at Work, Art and Labor in Victorian Britain, by Berenger as well, and I'm thrilled that he's here today to speak. Now, since 2012, a team of international scholars from the United States, Great Britain, India, and Pakistan has worked to make the JLK exhibition and its accompanying catalog, published by Yale University Press, a reality. We were amazed at the enthusiastic reception of the public and press to the opening of the show in London. There has also been a lot of pre-opening press for the show here in New York, and as you know, by the time you finish a show, you should really be where you needed to be at the very beginning, and you learn from your visitors. One woman brought in a Kipling material that was still being sold in Lahore in the 1960s, and it was described as a Kipling cotton material. And other people knew of people who had known the Kiplings and had reminiscences of them that answered some remaining unanswered questions that we had in our minds. And I can't wait to see what the public brings to our attention from our showing in New York here. I am now going to turn this presentation over to my co-curator, Julius Bryant, who is going to take you on our treasure hunt to Lahore and Shimla in search of the life and career of JLK, and then we're going to introduce our first speaker, Abigail McGowan.